Before we do get into today's episode with Victor Yocco, I'm happy to announce that this episode is brought to you by Fieldwork. So, do you want to take the stress out of managing your next research project? I'm sure I do. Who doesn't? Fieldwork, though, is here to help you. Whether you're conducting usability tests, human factor studies, or even need custom recruitment for those hard to reach users, Fieldwork has you covered. With high quality spaces, as you can see in the video edition of this podcast episode, reliable project support and expert recruitment services, they ensure your sessions run smoothly so you can focus on what really matters, the insights. Honestly, I'm going to give these guys a call for my next research project. So are you ready to bring your next project to life? I am. With support you can trust. Well, visit their website, www.fieldwork.com, to learn more. Fieldwork, focus on the research and they'll do the rest. Again, thank you to the guys at Fieldwork for getting involved in the UXR Minds podcast and project. So now let's get into today's episode with Victor. Okay, so happy to introduce another episode of the UXR Minds podcast with another awesome guest. And today we have Victor Yocco. I hope I pronounced that right. I always mess up people's name pronunciations, so I'm sorry if that was that was messed up then.
No, Dale,
But
you
happy to have
nailed
you
it.
on.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me on. Excited to be here. Excited to chat with you today.
Yeah, me too, me too. Happy to have you on as well. So you're a UX researcher with over 10 years of experience in the field, if I remember correctly, and you've worked with some of the largest corporations, organizations in the world. So you've got a lot of experience and someone who can share a lot of advice for our listeners. So that's one of the main reasons why I wanted to get you on here today, apart from being just a cool guy. So
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, and just a little more about my experience, my
yeah, go
background.
ahead.
I've got a PhD where I kind of had an academic background in psychology and
Hmm.
communication, and then I brought that into the UX field. I wasn't really a UX focused person when I was in graduate school. I wasn't like my goal wasn't to become a UX researcher, but
Sure.
it really gave me the foundation for doing research with people and
Hmm.
understanding how to conduct studies, interview style, surveys, observations, and then turn your data into applicable findings and recommendations. So, that's kind of where I started. And then I've got
Hmm.
over a decade of experience working in with design firm that was more of a consulting role. So going into other companies, working on their products with their product teams, or even providing them with a team to create a new product or do a
Hmm.
transformation. So um, that was across industries, not really focused on any specific industry. There was healthcare, there was finances, financial services, banking, state and state government. That was something that I've really enjoyed because that's feels like you're giving back to the people in some
Yeah.
regard, trying to make government services easier to access.
Mm.
And then through that, I've done a lot of writing. I've had a book come out about 8 years ago now. It seems like a long time ago, and it seems like a really short time ago. But and then I write quite a bit for Smashing Magazine and different
Okay.
publications on Medium, and that's usually when it's UX related. It's focused on applying psychology to design, just trying to
Okay.
bring in my background in psychology and
Mm.
saying, here's some principles of psychology. We might see these play out a certain way in our designs if we're wanting to address behavior or behavior change or get users
Mm.
to feel more comfortable using our products, that we should think
Mm.
about how we address psychology. So that's
Yeah.
that's a bit about me.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for going through all of that. So you've got a wealth of experience, as I mentioned before. I always like though to go back to right at the beginning because there's always either an interesting backstory as to how maybe you transitioned. There are some guests that transitioned from very random backgrounds as well. And also some that have come maybe through the more, let's say, the traditional route. UX probably doesn't really have a traditional linear route, but probably the ones that would come to mind, graphic design or things like that, and maybe transition more into the user experience discipline. For you, what was your journey into UX and particular UX research as well?
Yeah, I would have to categorize myself as non-traditional.
Okay,
Mentioned before
that's probably
that,
the
so
majority.
yeah, I went to grad school thinking I wanted to either become a professor or do
Mm,
research with people and understand more how they interacted with the environment, the outside world, nature.
mhm,
And so that's what I did in grad school. I studied communication and psychology in settings where people encounter nature or messages around nature, like zoos, aquariums, science centers.
mm,
Um, and what I did with that and how it led me to UX was I made a lot of connections. So the people I was working with on projects in grad school, some of them were in the same field as me, and others branched out and did different things. And there was one particular colleague who I'm, forever grateful to, and also still friends with now, who she went off and started doing research on her own, opened her own consulting firm, and she had a client who was a UX design firm, and
mm,
the honest truth is they really wanted to hire her, and she was not interested in taking a full-time job with them at the time. And so I had been communicating with her saying, "Oh, I'm interested in exploring new fields, new places to live." And she knew this, and she knew from her experience working with me that she was comfortable making a recommendation that maybe the company consider hiring me. So
mm,
I went through the interview process with them, and this was a small design firm, say less than 30 people at the time. And so I talked with the founders and kind of flubbed my way through some interviews with them, made myself sound smart enough, and they offered me the job. And,
wow.
for me, it was a pretty jarring transition in terms of the content, but not the
Mm,
actual tasks. So, like doing research, I was very comfortable. I could create a protocol, I could do the interviews, I could do the survey question creation. But like I would be, this is not an exaggeration. I would be sitting in meetings and people would say like navigation, and I would be Googling, what does website navigation mean? And that is how like I just needed to learn the terminology. And obviously
yeah.
that it only took a week or so of meetings to start understanding. The other one that really bothered me that I like couldn't wrap my mind around was this term hero image. And I'm like, for whatever reason, a lot of the meetings I was in initially in UX, we were talking about hero images, and I'm like, is it really that simple? Why are we calling it the hero image? It's just the big thing at the top of the page or whatever is
Mm,
drawing your eye. Okay. But, so I think that when I've talked to people, because people will reach out over LinkedIn and ask, how can I get into UX? How can I get into UX research? My
mm,
my number one recommendation is always, really just try to make connections, try to talk with people, show them what you've got. It might not
mm,
be as logical of a line of like, okay, I want to do UX research, so I'm going to focus all my attention on that. But it might just be
mm,
somebody you're working with on a project who really admires how you work,
mm,
and they'll remember you in the future and they'll bring you in. So,
yeah.
I think I lucked into it, and I'm glad I did.
Mm.
But I never, at any point in my life, I never said I want to do UX and then sought it out. So I feel very fortunate
Uh,
on that
yeah,
side of
no, yeah, because I find that there's two kind of routes. Either you find yourself doing it, almost like you kind of just kind of end up in that role and you learn as you kind of go along, as you were doing, searching the terminologies. I think we've all been there. Or you kind of seek it out, like you mentioned. So you come across it, you find it, and you learn about UX, and then yeah, that's what I want to do, and you head into that. That's probably the two most common camps that folk kind of fall into. And what is it about research for you that I don't know, gives you that spark that it's like, yeah, I love doing this, or and made you keep going and obviously gain the experience that you have.
Right. And that's a good question. And I think that what comes to my mind is that I'm somebody who really loves to learn. And so I feel
Mm,
like research always puts you in a position where you're learning. If ideally you're not coming into a research project where you're like, I know best.
no.
You have to be open to understanding the data that you're collecting. But
Mm,
then I think for me, specific to my personality and my background, you can tell this, I have a real general interest in a lot of things. So with UX research, what I like is being a consultant allows you to dip your toe in a lot of different topics or subject matter, but you can be an expert on the research
Mm,
and always learning something new if you're doing the research in a different industry. And what's exciting for me there, as I've seen my own self develop and as I've seen other people develop, is that ability to make connections based on your experience. So it's like, I might have done this research in a pharmaceutical company on their internal software that they're using, and then now I'm suddenly working with a media company or an entertainment company, and I'm seeing similar challenges
mm,
or similar goals. And what lessons did I learn that I'm bringing? And I guess that's also part of the benefits of being a consultant is that I have this more broad experience across different subject matters. But with the research piece, it stays fresh because you're asking new questions, you're getting answers. And I heard this in grad school, and I think I've echoed it plenty of times, which is like a good researcher comes up with more questions. The more answers you have, it's
mm,
like, oh, let's explore this a little more. Or if we found this out over here, what do we need to do to keep understanding this? So
mm,
research allows me to do that, and I do appreciate that.
mm. That's cool. That's cool. Thanks for sharing that as well. Um, and as well, one thing I wanted to clarify is the changes that you've seen in the industry because you've been in research for so long, and obviously as you've mentioned, it's a discipline that you love and you enjoy doing, and just the whole aspect of discovery, etc. What are the changes maybe in the discipline itself? So maybe the practices, because research has always been research, the fundamentals, or maybe how it's been integrated into workflows and how research is also collected, etc., has maybe changed? Or what are the biggest changes that you've seen over the years?
This is based on my experience, so it could be just that. But one thing I've seen is the attempt to turn research into something that isn't just done one time and then put away forever,
Mm-hmm.
to various degrees of success. But, thinking about the idea of a research repository that is
Mm.
accessible throughout an organization, I didn't see a lot or much of that 10 years ago when I was going into places,
Right.
either on the side of the team that I was working on or the clients that we were working with. So I think the value of having this stockpile of knowledge has become more clear over time. And I think that's playing itself out when you look at, I don't have any affiliation with any company, but with like, I want to say like Dovetail or places
Okay.
where they're trying to really say like your organization needs to have a repository that is taggable, searchable, accessible, so
Mm,
that you're not just paying for these studies and
mm,
having them set somewhere that nobody will know they happen again. So I think the value of the knowledge that's been generated has increased over time. And then I would say I think the people that are being drawn into UX research has somewhat changed. I believe that a lot of the folks who were coming in around the time I was might have had advanced graduate degrees, but in fields like psychology or human factors. And, I guess what I want to say is because the value that research has shown, there's been more positions open up. And so there's folks who are coming in who might be fresh out of their undergrad and they've got a good you know, academic background as far as being book smart, but there's the opportunity to really grow and expand based on their experiences. So I think just having research and we might be in a time of contraction right now, but for a long time I don't think we were, and I was seeing a
mm,
lot more people entering research, and that was reflected in growth in companies of research roles. So
mm. Excellent. No, 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 that's cool. And again, thanks for giving that perspective because someone like me that's entered in the past 4 or 5 years, I've seen a lot of changes in terms of maybe, I don't know, with the whole COVID situation and how research is now conducted remotely a lot more than maybe previously done. So I've seen kind of those changes. So it's nice to also get the perspective of someone who's been in the field double the length of time I've been in the field.
well,
Also,
yeah,
I got.
good. I mean, and I mean, that's a big change too, but I feel like with at least coming at it from like a consulting or a dispersed model, that wasn't so new. COVID, I think,
Mm,
hit a
true.
lot of companies where they had a product and a product team that was in one location. So
Yeah.
maybe that's where my specific experience comes into play, is that we were constantly just doing offsite remote work because
Yeah.
we would have a team based in the Philadelphia area usually, but then our clients would be all over the country, and it
True.
didn't necessarily make sense from a budget perspective for us to go
Yeah.
sit on site just to create design. You can
Mm,
use Sketch and Figma
yeah.
anywhere. We don't need to sit in your offices in Atlanta or
Mm,
in California just to do that. So we
mm,
were fairly quick to shift because we were already
mhm.
taking a majority of our meetings remotely. Um, I will say, like, the usability testing and things like that, we would use tools like Zoom, or at the time, I remember we used a tool called Join Me pretty often for
Yeah,
screen
okay.
sharing with participants. But that definitely, was a huge shift in terms
Mm,
of having it all go remote. So
yeah.
yeah, I
Yeah.
acknowledge that.
And I suppose as well, maybe like you say, your team was based in the Philadelphia area. Maybe that opened up during the COVID period, just probably from my experience, that you could be hired remotely as well. So you had maybe you were based maybe in Philadelphia, you were working for I don't know, a firm in Spain, and you're working on speaking with users based in the Middle East. I don't know. So it probably opened up that window of possibility as well, and kind of a shift in the dynamics of working within product teams that were all over the world. Yeah.
Yep, you nailed it. I don't have anything to add. You summed it up as
No, no.
well as that was the situation for sure.
No, absolutely. And how do you feel the research field is going to change as well? Because obviously, a lot of my listeners, I would say, well, from the ones I've spoken to, are entering the field or are quite new to UX research. So for them, obviously, they're learning skills now, or they're looking at the future of how they can position themselves as a UX researcher in the market. Obviously, if they're looking for a role that which we're both quite familiar with as well. So, how do you feel the field is going to change, and where should a new researcher where should they position themselves, or what should they focus on in terms of themselves or their skills?
Well, I say this to people regardless of what field you're in, is that I find that where I see a lot of things going is just that your knowledge and experience is a commodity, and being
Mm,
able to package that and sell it either to a future employer or as like a contract worker somewhere, that I really advocate that that's what people think about how they can kind of future proof themselves. So,
mm,
we hear a lot about AI right now, and
mhm,
that's being leaned on. And I think that we should have an understanding of how to use AI tools and to help, increase our efficiency where possible. So things like taking notes, or maybe turning recordings into transcripts and doing some
mm,
light analysis. But I don't think that replaces the need for the human and the experience and the recommendations that are like based on reality. So making sure you're solid there, making sure
mm,
you understand how research feeds into design and development. We don't want it to be this siloed experience where you've done research and there's just a report that communicates your findings to
mm,
others. You really want to know how to advocate that, why it's meaningful. I think we should try to accept that most of the companies and the products we work for have business goals. So we need to tie our findings into that and say how it's going to align with and enhance achieving the business goals.
mm,
But ultimately, I think what my answer to your question is understanding that you, as a human, as a body of knowledge, offer this unique experience. So, how do you then kind of frame that to entice either an employer or a partner, whatever you're trying to do? I think that we have, as researchers, a unique skill set. We're able to find more information and inform decisions in a
mm,
way that can be structured
mm.
and hopefully valid. So
That's the aim.
we need to communicate that that's something we can do. And whether
Mm,
we're going to join a team of 300 researchers at a mega company, or we're a research team of one and we offer our services to a select group of clients who maybe don't even have UX research as a role they've ever hired for,
mm,
we just need to be good at communicating that and showing the value, and then being confident in ourselves that that is what we bring. It can be
mm.
a weird feeling, I think, to just be like, what I bring is my intelligence, my ability to understand things is actually a commodity in a knowledge kind of market. So how
Yeah.
can I package that in a way that is sellable and
Mm,
feel like, it's a thing that I'm comfortable doing.
yeah.
So hopefully that
Yeah.
answers your
Yeah,
question.
yeah, no, absolutely it does. No, and I think that's really important. That's something that I probably struggled with at the beginnings when I was first, so like with my journey, I first encountered UX, realized I'd already kind of done something similar in previous roles, probably more customer experience, but it was connected. So then once I found research that was something you could do, so that's when I kind of fell in love with that. And but one of the things that I probably struggled with in my early roles was transmitting like how important research should be and how much value I can bring to the organization. And sometimes when you're junior or you're new in the role, and especially if you're junior and there's not many other researchers in the company, or if you're the only one and sometimes you've got that limited experience, do you have any advice to someone who finds themselves in that position? And because I encountered it in a few stand-ups and a few meetings where your research is questioned or your value or whatever you're producing is questioned, and you're in front of a screen of 50 eyes or in person around the table, and you're on the spot, and you're thinking, okay, what am I going to pull out the bag now to show that research has a value? Yeah, so what
Yeah.
would you say to that?
I mean, I'm not just pandering for you to like my answer, but like I think listening to your podcast and others where so my I guess the point I want to make is this. That question that you just said, or those that's 50 pairs of eyes staring at you, it isn't a surprise. At this point,
Yeah.
researchers with experience can tell you that's going to happen. You're never going
Yes.
to enter, and maybe it should always happen. You're never going to enter a meeting and not be challenged a little bit,
Of
because
course. Yeah.
it's possible some of your findings are going to go against what somebody's hoping for, or it's just
Mm,
possible that your findings are going to suggest someone's going to need to make an effort. And before they invest in that effort, they want to
mm,
actually make sure that what you're saying is the best that they can rely on. So you
mm,
don't necessarily need to look at a challenge as like a bad thing, but more of a, okay, we just really want to be sure of this decision. And then, so my point there is you need to be prepared for it. Like you shouldn't
yeah.
go into presentation thinking no one's going to challenge me. And that's why
Mm,
resources like your podcast and many podcasts that are out there,
mm,
and papers that exist to help you tell this story or explain how research might be valuable, you should consume that in advance and kind of build it
mm,
into your repertoire. You don't need to be heavy-handed about it. You don't need 15
mm,
slides about why research is important, but in the back of your mind, understand, why did you do this? How is it valid? How are you answering the questions? Why do you
mm,
think they should rely on what you're suggesting here? And part of that too should be how you set it up, the process the entire time of building trust from your team.
mm,
If you're going to make a ton of design recommendations, you should be working with the designers from the beginning. They should be helping you with thinking about what is critical to know from the user. They should not necessarily be collecting the data, but they should understand what data is being collected. Maybe they should do some
mm,
observing. So you're not hitting them with a surprise at the end that says, oh, guess what? Everything you're doing is wrong and we're going to redo it, which isn't a good way to do it anyway. But like, you should really think of it as building connections,
mm,
and the research can really be a conduit for conversations that are important to have happen. And the other thing I would say, I don't know if this is directly related, but it jumped into my head. The way I myself have done a lot of dealing with the struggle of how do I communicate research has been to write and think outside of just the studies that I do. So
Mm.
like I mentioned, I wrote a book. I write a lot for Smashing Magazine, and a lot of it is just me processing my own thoughts, but thinking this could be valuable to somebody else. So I would advocate for that to anybody who isn't just a researcher, but is in the field. At any time, the thoughts you're struggling with and you're processing, those are similar thoughts that other people are having. So if you're a beginner researcher and you're doing your first study, documenting that and then kind of trying to process it in a way that is in a shareable format afterward, maybe it's a
Mm.
quick article or a blog post, like that is something that now that you've had this experience, that's that much more experience than somebody else who isn't at your level has had, and they would
Mm.
benefit potentially from understanding where you went right, where you went wrong, what you thought of when it was all concluded, how you might do things differently. So really, and whether it's writing, whether it's sketching, whether it's some kind of like outlet that is potentially shareable with others, I advocate for that. I know that's not what
Yeah.
everybody is doing, but I do think there's value there. And from what I've seen from day one is designers and researchers are like voracious consumers of information.
Yes.
Um, they love books, they love articles, they love to, share what they've learned. So it's really, I mean, that's fun. That's great, especially
Mm.
from coming from academia where there's a big appreciation for knowledge sharing that like
Yeah.
design, definitely a field where I feel like knowledge sharing is supported. And you might encounter people that have a counterpoint, and that's okay. We can have
Mm.
discussions and try to,
Yeah.
you know, improve our arguing and negotiating skills through those discussions.
No, no, that's really true, and yeah, I think I would take one. Well, I would take many points from what you just said, but I think that the thing that really resonated for me personally would be building trust, and I think that's something that you can mitigate for those potential meetings with 50 eyes, pairs of eyes looking at you by building trust also beforehand with the various stakeholders, the various your colleagues, etc. And kind of slowly, if they do have a lack of knowledge around what research is and how it can be implemented into the product roadmap or into their workflow, having conversations beforehand, inviting them in on your research you're doing, etc. That's what helped me to avoid those situations because I was looking at a bunch of colleagues that already knew how I worked, they knew what I was doing, they knew already the value I was trying to bring. And if there was any, like you said before, I thought also was a really good point that it's not a bad thing to be challenged because it shows that you're all there, you all care about what you're working on. And if you're not challenged, if you're never challenged, then maybe there's a problem because you're not always going to be right, or it's not always going to be the right thing to follow. Maybe the research you've found, maybe there needs to be more research done, and maybe someone will bring something out and questioning what you've done and say, oh, have you looked at this? Or that's not really clear. And then you realize, oh yeah, maybe I do need to dive a bit deeper into that.
Absolutely. No, those are both, your kind of summary. I would just put a pin on that too, as far as saying like research is a process. And so the thing you
Mm.
should avoid is coming to the end of that process and surprising everyone. You have an opportunity to bring people
Yeah.
along at each
Mm.
step, and it shouldn't be secret because what you want to do ultimately is create something that a team is going to need to work on. But then to your
Yes.
point of, um, what was the second thing you said? I'm sorry, it just slipped my mind.
About maybe not always being right, or
Right.
maybe the research you find is, yeah, someone will question it and it will bring something to your attention as well.
Exactly. What I was going to say there is just one thing I learned in grad school, and I kind of talked about this when I was saying when you do research, it generates more questions. One thing I learned in grad school when you're looking at this world of the entire world, you have to pick something to focus on to make a study
Mm.
manageable. So you have to also then by design exclude certain things. And so if
Yeah.
you're presenting your findings and someone says, "Did you look at this?" That's the thing that maybe stuck out to them as being really important.
Mm.
And it doesn't mean you did the study wrong, but it means you made a
No, yeah.
decision. And so, you don't necessarily need to look at a challenge like that as saying you didn't do it right. And therefore, I feel
Mm.
like it's also okay to acknowledge that and say, you know what? That's a great question. And we might do another study where we would want to look closer at that. And if it's so important
Mm,
to understand that we can't move forward, like let's do that. And hopefully you've prevented any of those gigantic things by involving
mm,
people in the process.
yeah.
But if somebody says, "Did you look at it based on year of birth and you forgot to collect age data, or you just chose not to because you didn't see it being relevant at the time?" You say, "We didn't do it for this study. We didn't necessarily think that our prior knowledge dictated that that was going to be something
Mm,
that we had to think about ahead of time, but in the future
yeah.
we can try to account for that."
Mm,
Being honest about it, that
yeah.
it's just like anything else. It's a limited resource, time,
Mm,
money, meeting the needs of the team that's probably moving fast, trying to build something.
mm, yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I think sometimes that something that can help with that as well about those things that are coming up in the meetings can be beforehand making sure that everyone is aligned and everyone knows what you're researching and that all the goals or the what you're hoping to find from that research is in everyone's minds and they all know that you're looking for certain things. So it won't be a surprise to them when you do present at a meeting and they think, well, why is that not included? Or why didn't you do? Because they would have already seen your research brief or plan or whatever you want to call it, and they're okay. I know that Dale or Victor's going to go and find that out. Obviously, in the meantime, things can come out or questions can come up, but I think having that open channel and always being honest and open and transparent will also allow people in the meantime. They won't feel that they have to wait to the meeting. They can also bring it up to you in private, and that can just help with your feeling comfortable in your role of being a researcher and feeling valued as well.
No, you said it all there. And the only thing I would add is from my experience, that's where I've also learned that documenting decisions can
Mm,
be a good thing so
yeah.
that, you might find the person that only attends every one out of every five meetings, but you're like, okay, well, in meeting three, there was 15 of us and we decided we had to focus on this specific
Mm.
thing. Or even in meeting one where you were there, you championed this idea and now you've changed your mind. But hey, we had to make a decision at that time and that's the way we
Yeah.
went. So really not just trying to recall in the moment, oh, why did we decide to look at this or why was this the direction we took?
Yeah. No, absolutely, absolutely. That's true as well. But yeah, it's been really interesting having this chat with you, Victor, and I appreciate you coming on to the podcast and sharing your knowledge. And it is a wealth of knowledge, and you've got a ton of experience and in various kind of fields as well. So I appreciate you coming on and sharing that with our listeners.
Absolutely, my pleasure. And I'm always available if anybody ever wants to ask me a question. I'm on LinkedIn if you just look me up there or shoot me an email. It's just my name, Victor Yocco at gmail.com. I'm always happy to chat UX or anything else, really. So
And I can
I
vouch for
appreciate the opportunity to
that.
come on and, chat with you. It's been a great time.